Genius, especially in weird warfare, knows no bounds. The kind of mind that comes up with a ship of ice is hardly going to let practicality get in the way. Throughout modern history, some of the craziest ideas have involved animals. And when it comes to using animals in weapons, weird warriors have really pushed the boundaries. Even so, with the onset of the Cold War, things got a little out of hand. It's the 1950s. Everyone in Europe fears a surprise attack from the Russian army. So one idea is to take landmines to a whole new level. It's an idea that will involve nuclear weapons and warm poultry. Enter Operation Blue Peacock.
The story behind the Blue Peacock project is kind of a story about a perfectly reasonable idea that goes quite right off the rails.
That is, if you consider using nuclear bombs as landmines a reasonable idea.
They would bury a series of 10-kiloton nuclear weapons along the border of East and West Germany.
These massive nuclear weapons would be triggered by an electronic timer. But there was one small problem.
It didn't work when it got cold.
Electronic conductors are sensitive to freezing temperatures, and it gets very cold on this border in winter. But great military minds don't give up that easily.
How do you keep them warm?
They first tried thermal blankets. Didn't work.
I suppose it could be some type of electronic heating device, or it could be a living, breathing animal that provides warmth and energy from its body.
Bingo!
They decided to surround them with chickens.
And it was chickens.
The thinking behind this was simple. Chickens are warm-blooded creatures, really warm. The average body heat of a chicken is 107 degrees Fahrenheit. If you put 40 chickens in a box, they raise its temperature by 8 degrees. So chickens could be used as natural insulators.
That's just crazy. How do you keep the chickens alive? How do you keep the chickens from escaping? How do you keep the chickens from pecking away at the bomb and disabling it? What do you do with all the chicken manure that they're going to be spreading around?
Plans for the defense of the free world had clearly gotten carried away. Luckily, someone, somewhere, did a reality check. Taking massive tanks out with the help of warm poultry might sound stupid, but as we'll see, there is a long and ridiculous history of using animals in weird warfare. From pigeon-guided bombs to mosquitoes of mass destruction, weird warriors have tried every kind of trick to turn animals into weapons, including turning man's best friend into a canine tank buster. The following stories are true. They involve exploding dogs and trained mosquitoes. Viewer discretion is advised. It is World War II, and the Nazis are running rampant across the Eastern Front. Tanks are still the problem. This time, it's the Russians who are trying to stop the Nazis in Hitler's panzer divisions. But everything they try gets blown away before it even comes close.
The German tanks were phenomenal. They were very capable, and they were wreaking havoc. And you've got this problem: how do you knock out a tank? They didn't have all the munitions you may have now as anti-tank munitions. How do you take this weapon out of the battlefield?
The best way to bomb a tank is from underneath. And to do this, the Russians needed a guidance system with speed, agility, and intelligence. Meet Shadow. Shadow is going to help us demonstrate how the Russians trained their dogs. Their trainers use a technique called positive reinforcement, made famous by the experiments of Ivan Pavlov and his dogs in 1927. After completing a task, Shadow is given a reward, which makes him want to do it again. The Russians trained the dog to complete a series of tasks. Run under an enemy tank, drop a bomb, run back.
It's called chaining. He has to look at the tank. He has to follow the command. He has to run. He has to run quickly. He has to dive under the tank. You would train these operations, sequentially or by themselves, and then chain them together where the reinforcer is given at the end.
It's the next bit that gets really dangerous.
Right. We need to pop this on him.
Yeah.
In what today would be seen as animal cruelty, the dog carries a 26-pound mine in a jacket strapped on its back. For this to work, the Russians had to train a dog like Shadow to pull the doggy chew and release the bomb.
It's called shaping. When he looks at the string, you give him a reinforcement. You keep doing that. And then he eventually will touch his mouth to the string. And then eventually he'll pull it.
It was an ambitious plan. Shadow would have to release the bomb at exactly the right place and exactly the right time.
How confident would you be that you could train a dog and be sure it was always going to pull it at the right place?
I wouldn't. No.
This is where the whole thing broke down for the Russians. When they actually applied the plan, the dogs would run under the tank, then run back to their trainers, usually with the ticking bomb still attached to the harness. So it was back to the drawing board with one simple fix.
So what we have now is a trigger mechanism. When he goes under, this comes down, it detonates.
In training, it works perfectly. The problem is that the Russians just didn't think or smell like dogs.
A good way to put it is the dog sees the world through his nose.
The Russians made the mistake of training the dogs on their own tanks. And as it turns out, Russian tanks have their own unique smell.
And the Russian tanks used diesel. When it came to deploying the bombs on the German tanks, they were gasoline. Of course, that's confusing.
From the dog's point of view, anything that smelled of gasoline clearly wasn't a tank. So the dog got confused. Having failed to find anything that smelled like a tank, the dog came back with his bomb and its automatic trigger. Even so, the dog bomb worked, sort of. At the Battle of Kursk in August 1943, dog bombs took out 12 German panzers, which left the Germans with only 2,488 in that battle alone. The Russians never recorded how many tanks they lost to friendly fire,